Good evening. Good evening. Hi, you're Herschel. It's great to see such a wonderful crowd here tonight. I do have to apologize for the cookie shortage. It won't happen again, not on my watch. So I hope you had a good dinner. So tonight we have Sean Faulkner, who is returning. This is his third time to speak with this group. And he is a professor at the Command General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, where we get many of our excellent speakers. And so we're really lucky to have that so close by. And Dr. Faulkner earned his degree, her doctorate degree in history from K-State. So some people here will be very happy. Yes. And from 2008, so 11 years, you have been the supervisory full professor of military history and teaching team leader. Does that fit on a business card? Not anymore. So he's responsible for the coordination and overall quality of instruction for 12 instructors. He's an expert on the American Civil War, the French Revolution, and Napoleon, the Philippine Insurrection, and World War I that he'll be talking about tonight. He is the author of 2 books and 1 in progress. And tonight he will do a book signing afterwards, Pershing's Crusaders, the American Soldier in World War I. So after the program. So tonight his topic is Crossing No Man's Land, the Trench Stalemate and Birth of Modern Warfare, 1915 to 1980, 18. In August 1914, all the great powers of Europe went to war expecting to fight sweeping battles of maneuver. Yet, after only 4 months of fighting the war on the Western Front, it settled into a stalemated conflict characterized by trench warfare. The lecture will focus on why the trench stalemate developed in France and Belgium by the late fall of 1914, how the major combatants tried to break the deadlock, and why, in the end, all these efforts never truly succeeded in breaking through the trenches. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sean Faulkner.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thanks for coming out on a cold, cold night. Every time I've done it, it's been a cold Kansas night. So Blair, can you maybe do this in the summer next time? You know, it was interesting. Before we were getting prepared, she came up and said, "We're going to be short of cookies. Do you have any live ammunition for those rifles?" So now, just a question. There's a little participation we're going to do tonight. Show of hands, if I could put you in a time machine, who would want to go back to 1914, 1918 and be a World War I infantryman? Okay. Okay. Please raise your hands. Okay, there's a reason why armies go with young people. Okay? One, they're in great physical shape, right? Okay, they're fearless, and most importantly, they're dumb. So, that is my nephew, so I can get away with that. Now, there are a number of myths associated with World War I. In fact, a huge number. And one of the ones we're going to talk about today is this one. And this comes out early 1950s, 1960s. And the argument goes that the armies that go off to war in 1914 are armies of lions led by donkeys. Okay? That the generals were not very bright, had no idea what they were doing, and were callous. And there's some truth to this. Out of this war, you'll get something called Chateau Generalship. And the idea is, while the soldiers were in the front, eye deep in hell, as the poem went, the generals are way back behind the line in a nice French chateau, drinking champagne, bouncing Fifi on their knee, having a really good time. And there's some truth to that. But we're also going to see maybe why some of those things develop. Now, first thing we got to understand is that in the 60-odd years between the American Civil War and World War I, you have one of the greatest changes in military technology in human history. To the point that I would argue if you were to take all the other military technological developments in the previous 3 millennia, they don't add up to the amount and degree of change that is occurring. And what I show here is just some difference. On the left, you have the weapon systems of the American Civil War. Then you have the weapon systems that will be predominant in World War I. There's a couple of big ones here. One of the first big changes is this Frenchman up here, Paul Viol. In 1884, he invents something called smokeless powder. Prior to this, you used black powder. And funny thing, if you want to develop new weapon systems, new rifles, you don't start with a rifle, you start with a cartridge. Smokeless powder burns a lot faster, which means the round is going to go further, it's going to be a flatter trajectory, and it's easier to train the soldiers how to use it. You take that weapon system, you mate that with what's going on in the Industrial Revolution, and by the time you get to World War I, these are the state-of-the-art infantry rifles. American Civil War infantryman is getting off 3 aim shots a minute, if he is very lucky, to about 400 to 500 meters. By the time you get to World War I, soldiers are carrying these bolt action magazine rifles. This is the German Gewehr 98, their standard infantry rifle of World War II. One of the biggest developments from the Mauser brothers is not actually the rifle, it's the stripper clip. Okay? You open this up, you put it in the top, you push in, and you reloaded this rifle with 5 rounds in roughly 3 seconds. Then you add more in. Civil War infantryman, 3 rounds a minute. By the time you get to World War I, even the worst infantryman is getting off 15 to 20 shots a minute. Some armies up to 30 shots a minute. But there's more. In steps the American Hiram Maxim, and Maxim's a fascinating guy. He's one of these people that the Republic throws up from time to time. He is a self-trained electrical and mechanical engineer. He's got about a 9th grade formal education. But he is so good with his electricity, his work in electricity and mechanics, that he's in Europe in 1884 to receive an award. When he's there, he runs an old friend of his, and I love this quote, one of my favorites from military history. The friend says, "Hiram, hang your electricity. If you want to make a barrel of money, invent something to allow the Europeans to slit each other's throat with greater facility." Okay? Now, Hiram, being a good American, liked the challenge and wanted to make a barrel of money. Went back to his workshop, and within 2 years, he had perfected the Maxim gun. Now, this is a British Vickers gun. It's the grandson of the gun that Maxim designs. This is the first true automatic weapon. What Hiram Maxim does is he uses physics. Each action has an equal but opposite reaction. When that new smokeless powder cartridge fires, it creates a lot of recoil. On the side of this weapon is a big spring. When the rifle cartridge fires, the recoil goes back, ejecting the spent cartridge. The spring catches the bolt, puts it back into battery, and by harnessing each action has an equal but opposite reaction, that weapon is now capable 600 to 800 rounds a minute, depending on the weapon that you get. Okay? So there's a lot of stuff going out. The last one, and ultimately the most important, is the first modern cannons. The French developed the first modern artillery piece, the model 1897 75 millimeter howitzer in 1897. Imagine that. Okay? A couple of things that make it modern. It is a breech loader, unlike the Civil War cannon. Very slick operating breech. It fires fixed ammunition, so just think like a big rifle cartridge that you're loading inside the cannon. Most importantly, underneath the barrel is a hydraulic recoil mechanism. You ever seen a Civil War cannon fire? The minute you pull the lanyard, what does the cannon do? It goes rolling way back. And the problem, of course, with that is the crew now has to laboriously roll it back in and still load it from the muzzle. This thing, when it fires, that hydraulic recoil mechanism keeps the cannon just like this. What that means is that modern artillery piece can fire a surge rate of 20 to 25 rounds a minute. In other words, for a period of time, the artilleryman can fire that cannon as rapidly as an infantryman can fire the rifle. Now, That tells us that there is a lot of nasty things flying on this battlefield. Not only is there more nasty stuff flying on the battlefield, but it's also hitting you at longer and longer ranges and for deadlier effect. The question I always ask my students is, do the generals, do the officers understand this change? What do you think? Okay, show of hands, these guys were lost. Okay, donkeys, right? Not true. These officers are not dumb men. They absolutely know what this technology is going to do. They've seen it. They've seen it in the Boer War. They've seen it in the Russo-Japanese War. They've seen it in 2 Balkan Wars. They know that the battlefield is a much deadlier place. The problem is, what are you going to do about it? Just for a question, how many of you think that cyber is going to have a major effect on the way that wars are run in the future, cyber warfare? Do you know that for sure? So in many ways, we're at that same inflection point that these generals were, 100 years ago. You know it's there, you know it's going to have an effect, but what do you do about it? So, as these armies are getting ready for the war, and they're all getting ready for the war, they're just waiting for something to happen. There's an understanding that this war is going to be very, very bloody. But they also come to convince themselves that it's going to be short. And it's going to be short because it has to be. They're afraid of what will happen to their societies if the war is not short. They're not sure that their societies can put up with casualties. They're not sure that their industrial base can keep churning out the amount of munitions required. It's going to be short because it's got to be. So they get themselves worked. How can we steal a march on our enemies? How can we get the advantage to keep the war from turning into a long attritional total war? Well, easy. How about this? The army that mobilizes first, moves first, gets their troops on the trains, and attacks first will be the army, be the nation that wins. Makes sense, right? Problem is, everybody's thinking that. The Germans come up with a great idea. Ultimately called the Schlieffen Plan, and Churchill will say that this piece of paper is the most important document, public document, in the previous 3 centuries of human existence. And it's all about the Germans' idea of avoiding what they fear most, a 2-front war. Because you've got an alliance. You've got the French and the Russians, maybe the Brits if they show up, against the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. Germany fears encirclement. This has always been the German fear. So they have to make sure that they beat one side very quickly and then turn and beat the other. And the whole idea behind the Schlieffen Plan is to do that. They know that the French strength is going to be here. They know the French are probably going to attack in Alsace-Lorraine. Easy. Hit them where they're not. While the French are focused over here, the Germans will go through Belgium. Of course, the minute they go through Belgium, you've just assured that the British are going to come into the war. But if you get the war you want, you don't have to worry about it. This plan falls apart. It's built on such a tissue of assumptions that from the moment the German invasion begins, all of the assumptions fall apart. Now you've got a problem. These numbers are staggering. Nothing in the wildest dreams or nightmares of the politicians and the generals going into the war in 1914 could have imagined the scope of this carnage. And the problem is now, you don't have a plan B. And by the time you get to November, 101 years ago, about now, you have 2 armies on the Western Front. We're going to focus on the Western Front tonight. That now extend in nearly an unbroken line from the Franco-Swiss border over 400 miles to the North Sea in Belgium. This is going to be a problem. Never in human history has anyone been confronted with this scope and scale of war. And we're going to ask for a little sympathy for the devils here. We can talk about these armies of lions being led by donkeys, but once you get to this in the fall of 1914, nothing in these general officers' previous experience, nothing in their training, nothing in their education has prepared them for this. And all of their politicians are saying, get it done now. Get it done now. We're not sure how long our societies can wait. But here's our issue. By the time you start to get into this long 400-mile line, when the fighting dies down in the winter of 1914, the armies, as you can imagine with all of those casualties, are exhausted. This was going to be a come-as-you-are war. No plan for a long attritional struggle. You're going to get the guys with the amount of conscripts that you have on the ground. You're going to fight with the munitions that you have in hand, and it's going to be over. But you've run out of all that ammunition. Just to give you an idea, that French 75 gun has a go-to-war stockage of 1,200 rounds. That's supposed to last you the entire war. But I told you guys that it can fire up to 25 rounds a minute. Once you run out of those rounds, you're going to get a promissory note, okay? We're going to give you more rounds. It's just going to take a couple of months to get the factories tooled up. The lethality of weapons has now convinced the soldiers that this modern battlefield is a serious business. And if you're caught out in the open, you're going to die very quickly. There are no assailable flanks, which is, again, something rare or something novel in history. And the soldiers are going to dig in. Dig in just to survive. Now, these are what these trenches look like in the late fall, early winter of 1914. Now, if you ever had a chance as a military, any infantry guys here? Okay, I wouldn't admit it either. I was a tanker, so my trench always rolled with me. But these are horrible trenches. They don't have any overhead cover. They don't have a lot of protection. And if you had, fresh troops, and if you had heavy artillery, and if you had a lot of rounds, it would be easy to knock the enemy out of these trenches. The problem is you don't have that. Sometimes the technology is lagged behind. Most of the artillery pieces that are being used, the artillery rounds in the early days, are what we call shrapnel. And shrapnel are these little lead balls. Turns a cannon, takes an artillery shell into a big shotgun. Goes over the top of the trench, blows up. Okay? It is perfect for troops and cavalry out in the open. It is worthless against that. What you need against that is this. Okay? But the problem is you don't have this. And it's going to take a long time before you get that. And by the time you get that, those trenches turn from this to this. Now you've got a serious military obstacle. Because now it's not just a little cut in the earth, it is cuts of trenches several layers deep. And again, nothing in your experience, nothing in your training, and nothing in your previous education has prepared it for you, and now you've got to figure it out. So, the officers realize this. This is Ferdinand Phocion. He will ultimately be the override Allied commander for the Allied armies in 1918. It takes the guys that long to figure that one out. Prior to World War I, he had been an instructor in the French École de Guerre, equivalent to where I worked, the Command and General Staff College. And he was one of these early officers that said, the only thing you really need is a rifle and a bayonet. Rifle, bayonet, there's the Army charge. By November of 1914, he's now a corps commander. He's seen the reality, and this is what he's telling his staff. What I taught you was wrong. And we're going to have to relearn this. But the problem with war, if you're relearning something, it's costing lives. And these are what the trenches look like. This is actually a British trench map from 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. There's some new things here that you wouldn't have found on a trench map or a map at all, military map before. First of all, the entire map is now gridded off in a section. Because quickly you figure out that the biggest killer on this battlefield is not the machine gun and it's not the rifle, it's artillery. 70% of the war's casualties will be caused by shell fire. But now it's going to be who can control the shell fire and make it work for you. Going into the war, the artillery was going to be direct fire, just like it was in the American Civil War, just like it was in the time of Napoleon. Now you're going to do something called indirect fire, where the artillerymen will never see the targets that they're shooting at. They're going to use geometry, trigonometry to figure out how to hit the target. But if you're going to do that, somebody still has to see where the enemy is. And now we're going to see this constant cycle in World War I, this arms race, this keeping up with the Joneses. The most important thing that aviation does in World War I is artillery spotting and observation. Drop the mic. Now, everybody knows this. Controlling the air allows you to see the battlefield, allows you to gain intelligence, allows you to use your artillery to its best effect. But if that's going to give an advantage to your enemy, and you've got to protect your own, then you're going to get in this vicious cycle. War, more than any other human endeavor, is the mother of invention. The first fighter planes in history is the Faulkner. Comes out after only about 7 months of the war. And it's designed to shoot down those observation planes. But now you get in this catch-up race. The minute that the Faulkner comes out, you have something called the Faulkner Scourge. The Allies have nothing to match this, and Allied planes are falling at a rapid pace. And if you don't figure out a way to keep up with the Joneses, you're going to lose planes, you're going to lose pilots. So the British and the French build a new plane that can go maybe a little higher, a little faster, have more machine guns. Because the minute that they build a new plane, then the Germans are going to build another one. The operational life of an aircraft frame in World War I, an aircraft design, is 6 months. Anybody ever heard of an F-35? You know how long we've been messing around with that? Like since I was a second lieutenant. That's a long time ago. Very quick. Now, let's talk about the challenges here. When you look at the trenches, it's not a trench. It's not a single trench. It's not even a couple of trenches put together. It's actually a couple of trenches put together in a belt, followed by another belt, generally followed by a belt after that. That's going to create some problems. Now, forward of the trenches, forward of these trench belts, both sides have staked in barbed wire. Okay? This is German barbed wire. I actually, believe it or not, dug it up from about right there. Okay? Now this is good, Kansas farm country. That looks like your barbed wire, doesn't it? I mean, that is some serious anal retentive Teutonic barbed wire. Okay? It's high tensile steel. The barbs are very close together, and the barbs are very long and sticky. That's what my daughters would call it, sticky. Okay? And the whole idea behind this is you have the barbed wire staked in forward of your trenches and also your support trenches, sometimes 8 to 10 yards deep. And the only thing it's designed to do is to hold your attack in no man's land. So let's talk about what you're going to have to do to win the war, to break out of the trenches. First thing you've got to do, easy, get up out of your trench and cross no man's land. Simple. Right? These guys are going, oh yeah, we'll do it. Okay, there's a problem here, right? If you look at the technology that's been designed, the balance has swung towards the defenders. That Maxim gun, you start firing 500, 600, 700 rounds a minute, you got a problem. The barrel starts to melt. Maxim's a smart guy. To keep that from happening, he took a hollow metal jacket, filled it full of water. This is what's called a water-cooled machine gun. Okay? Problem solved. Oh, except after about 700 rounds of firing, the water in the jacket starts to boil. And if you don't find a way of capturing that, all you're doing is delaying the amount of time it's going to take before the machine gun jams. Again, Maxim's a smart guy. He puts a little watercock valve under the barrel, takes some radiator hose, puts it in a can. 700 rounds, water starts to boil, turns to steam, steam goes down the hose into the can where it recondenses into water, not a closed system. Okay? So about 750 rounds, you unscrew the little thumb screw in the back here, put it in a funnel, pour it back in. Problem with that, these weapons are heavy. This Vickers gun is a lightweight. It only weighs 96 pounds. The Hotchkiss that the French use weighs 124 pounds. The German MG08, again, weighs 124 pounds. Hey, what do you look like crossing no man's land with a 124-pound machine gun? Not a target, a slow-moving target, okay? And the slow-moving targets in World War I quickly turned into, well, dead, not moving targets, okay? If I'm defending in my trench, I could care less how heavy this weapon is. It's not going anywhere. While you can fire 600-700 rounds a minute, the actual rapid combat rate of fire is 250 rounds, which is one box of ammunition. But each of those boxes weighs 15 pounds. So it's not just the weight of the gun, it's also the weight of the water, and it's the weight of the ammo. Again, if I'm defending, I could care less. I've stockpiled the ammo, I've stockpiled the water, life's good. If I'm attacking, I now have to have a 10-man crew that carry all of that stuff. 10 slow-moving guys. So as I'm crossing no man's land, I'm going to have to find some way of keeping the enemy's head down to give me a hope in hell of crossing that area. The minute I step out, how much of me does the enemy see? The full Monty, right? How much of the enemy do I see? Ooh. So, stacked up against me, just like this thing on my ear, okay? Excuse me while I get that. So, first thing, I got to get across no man's land. Easy. Next challenge. Once I cross no man's land, I have to break into the first set of trenches. Oh, that's his territory, right? He knows his trenches. For me, even if I get aerial maps, it's still going to be terra incognita. They know the twists, they know the turns, and I got to fight my way through this. I know that the Germans are going to do something. The minute if I capture a trench, the Germans are going to do an immediate counterattack. Because once I've captured the trench, that's where I'm at my weakest point as the Allied attacker. And if the German can hit me there before I can consolidate, he's got the better chance of throwing me out if I've got a chance to get here, okay? Now, to make sure that I can defend that trench, I got to take a lot of extra stuff with me. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 1 July 1916, the advance waves of the German infantry are carrying about 45 to 50 pounds of gear. The wave right after them are carrying 65 to 80 pounds of gear. Most of that gear, sandbags, shovels, extra barbed wire. If you think about a trench, the trench has something called a fire step, because you want to be under the ground, right? But if the enemy's coming, you need to be able to have a little step so you can step up and shoot. If you capture an enemy trench, the fire step's on the wrong side. So you got to now get the shovel and build that up really quickly before the other guy comes across. So, easy. Oh, you can probably assume that if I have been successful at getting up and crossing no man's land and breaking into the first set of trenches, I'm done. I'm done. I've lost too many officers, I've lost too many men, I'm too short of ammunition, I'm done, I'm culminated. Problem is, I still have 2 more trench segments to get through, 2 more trench belts. So what has to happen is rinse and repeat. If I've captured the first one, now I have to have fresh troops with fresh ammunition, all that other supplies to now move forward and capture the next belt of trench. But if they've captured that second belt of trench, again, they're probably done, culminated. So now I need to bring even more fresh troops to take the third belt. Oh, by the way, they still have to cross no man's land as they're coming across. If I've done those things, gotten up out of my trench, crossed no man's land, broken into the first set of trench, and then broken through the subsequent belt of trenches, then and only then can I break out into the green fields of Loyon. Allies know if you can throw the Germans out of the trench, you have the material, you have the manpower, you can crush the Germans. Hope you guys can see this one. This is an actual intelligence map from the Anzac Corps, the Australian and New Zealanders, from 1917. Again, you're flying over those German trenches. You are gathering intelligence. These, what they're taking here for an attack, are 3 German divisions in this sector. Each of those divisions, anywhere between 14,000 and 16,000 men. Now, each one of these little boxes here is a German infantry company. Again, about 150, 200 men. That's a lot of people in a very small area. Winston Churchill says, if you want to understand World War I, understand this. The problem with the Eastern Front is there's too much land, too few soldiers. The Western Front, too little land, too many men. Traditionally, Army guys say, if you're going to launch a successful attack, you need to have a 3-to-1 advantage. Okay? So just to put this into perspective, in this little area of the front, of the 400-mile long front, 3 miles deep, 4 miles across, the Germans have the equivalent of every man, woman, and child of Leavenworth and Lansing, Kansas, where I'm from. Every man, woman, and child in that area, 3 by 4 mile area, okay? Now, traditionally, to take that out of the 3-to-1 advantage, we would need the entire population of Shawnee County, Kansas. So everybody you know, all your friends, all your grandkids, all those people shoved together just to hopefully push through this little 4-mile long segment of the front, okay? Oh, but here's the catch. Because World War I, the firepower advantages shifted to defender, a 3-to-1 advantage is not going to work. You really need about a 5 to 6 man advantage of the attacker over the defender. So not only are we going to take the entire population of Shawnee, Kansas, we're going to go down to Lawrence too. Yeah, get some of those hippies in the college, right? And shove them here on this attack. Think about that. That's a lot of people. Now, again, artillery is what you are going to hedge this on. Artillery is what's going to give your guys the hope of getting up and crossing no man's land and breaking into the first set of trenches. But you have to invent a whole science of indirect fire to make this work. And you also have to now create systems. Warfare before for generals were sitting on the hill with a big map, being inspirational like Grant or like Sherman or like Napoleon. That's not the way it works anymore. What generals do now, from that point to today, is make systems work. The first guy to figure this out is Henri Pétain, coming at the last minute to save the French at Verdun. The Germans are crushing them. They've lost command of the air. The first thing to make the system work, to make his artillery work, is to gain control of the air battle. He turns to his air commander, a guy named Carnot de Rose, and says, "Rose, I am blind, sweep the skies." And they managed to win the world's really first air supremacy battle. Now that that's done, you can make the rest of this work. Pétain's most famous quote is true throughout the war. Artillery conquers, infantry occupies. But I got to mass the right number of guns. But to mass the right number of guns, I've got to keep that supply system going. I've got to keep the trucks full of ammunition, the railroads full of ammunition, moving the stuff to the front. And this is going to extend all the way back to every village and every town in France, and every village and every town in Britain, every village and every town in Germany, to feed this machine. Pétain's going to make the system, but this is a new thing in World War I. That for the first time in history, you'll actually have more soldiers behind the lines as supply guys, as administration guys, as medical guys, as you'll have in the front line. To feed the beast, Pétain comes up with what's called the Noriega system. Under this nasty, firepower-heavy battlefield, units start to melt. And his whole idea behind this is I can probably only keep a division in the line for about 7 to 14 days. And after that, they'll either taken too many casualties or so beaten up that they're no longer effective. So the Noriega system is just that. I'll put you in the line and I'm going to truck you out. Put you in the line and truck you out. And there'll always be enough veterans living when I truck you out to build the new unit. This is actually pretty smart. The German solution to this is I put you in the line and I keep you in the line and here's some more replacements, and that Platoon guy's a smart guy, right up until he liked the Nazis, but that's okay. Now this is the magic number. Okay? I want you to pay attention to this. We have here the British fighting the battles in 1915 and 1916. And what you see is the amount of shells, a pound of shell per yard of trench, to try to crush the defenders to let their guys cross the no man's land and capture the first set of trenches. Okay? Think about that. New Chapelle. Oh, by the way, there are more artillery rounds expended in 3 hours of firing at New Chapelle than the entire British Army had expended during the Boer War. Then you sort of screw up. The magic number, though, is 660. Think about that. I have here a pound of shell. A pound of shell. I'll even pass it around. Don't cut yourself. It's sharp. Okay? A pound of shell. I want you to think about that. A pound of shell per yard of trench. This is a yard of trench. This is a yard of trench. This is a yard of trench. So there are 660 of those nasty little pieces of metal falling right here. Falling right here. Falling right here. So here's the question. If you figured it out, 660 being the magic number, why then did the British drop after that? Think about how much production it takes for an attack to put 660 pounds of shell into a yard of trench. You've got the solution, but you're not sure you can continue to do this. Sadly, though, if you'll notice what's happening, it's the ugly reality of learning modern war, trying to find that sweet spot, that spot that will give me the military victory, crush the defenders, but also allow my society to continue to function. I'll let this one sink in. Okay? How many people are repulsed by this quote? Show of hands. Okay? My son is an infantry specialist in Alaska. Okay? This would infuriate me. Problem is, he's actually telling the truth. At this period of history, with this massive amount of technological changes, with this unprecedented challenge of trench warfare, with no assailable flank, sadly, Phocion's right. That to get this right, you're going to lose a lot of soldiers. The problem is, it's always going to be a moving target. As soon as you think you've got it right, the enemy moves the goalpost. Here's the other problem. The law of unintended consequences. If you're firing 660 pounds of shell per yard of trench, you are physically changing the surface of the earth. Now I've created a dilemma for myself. What I have to do to accomplish phase 1 and phase 2, cross no man's land, break into the first set of trenches, makes it damn near impossible then to do phase 3 and phase 4. Because all those fresh troops have to cross all that area again. And more importantly, if I do manage to break out through all of those belts of trenches, I'm still going to have to bring up more fresh troops. And I'm going to have to bring up the artillery. And I'm going to have to bring up supplies. And before I can do that, there's going to be a lot of engineers that have to smooth out the earth. And in the time it takes to smooth out the earth, the enemy's dropped back 10, dug back in again. We also have this problem when it comes to uneven technological development. Weapons technology is going crazy, going through the roof, but command and control technology, what officers and sergeants have to do to talk to their soldiers, has remained flat. In fact, the most modern piece of technology is the field phone. But there's a problem with that. It's a linking. There's a wire that connects the headquarters to your field phone at the front. The wire is very fragile. Anything will break it. Artillery will definitely break it. But on the attack, you have this guy laying the wire. That's a 50-pound roll of wire, usually on the back, okay? And what do you look like carrying 50 pounds of wire crossing no man's land? Again, slow target, please insert bullet here, right? Now, your soldiers will break this too, because when they're crossing no man's land, you know what they're worried about? Dying. They're not worried about your wire. So we've got an issue. It's hard to command and control this thing. And it's going to lead to the war being exceptionally, rigorously controlled. Today, if a soldier gets into trouble somewhere in Afghanistan, you pick up the radio and air is going to be on station pretty fast. World War I doesn't work that way. The communications aren't reliable. This is what's called the Barrage Map. You'll see these little lines there, but if you look really close, there's times behind each one of them. I can't rely on the communication, so what I do is I plan out the fires to the nth degree. The fire is going to hit here on this line, it's going to stay here for 4 minutes, and then it's going to creep up to the next line, where it'll stop and it'll creep up, pre-planned. If anything stops the infantry, if anybody delays the infantry, those fires keep rolling and they never come back. Everybody getting depressed? Yeah. Now, this is, of course, one of the most famous battles in World War I, the Battle of the Somme. Starts in the 1st of July, still the bloodiest day in British military history. Nearly 20,000 dead, 60,000 total casualties. Most of those casualties fall within the first 30 minutes of the battle. But as the battle goes on, you'll notice that by the time it's ended, the casualties amongst the Germans are almost equal to the Allies. Now, wait a minute, 3-to-1 advantage, the defenders should have a lot fewer casualties. What's happening is what Foch is talking about. By the time you get both in the Battle of Verdun and in the Somme, the Allies now have the production going, have all those cannons, have all those shells, and they're learning how to use it. To the point that by you get to October, November of 1918, the British officer says, I don't like this grid square, make it go away. And it does. And if there happens to be a bunch of Germans in it, so much the better. The Germans are also screwing up here, though. They're on the backside of this development. So when the battle begins, this is what the chief of the German general staff, Erich Falkenhayn, is telling his commanders. Hold everything you got. We're too short of troops. Hold it. If you lose it, counterattack. And that becomes part of the German trick. Too much so, okay? You ever had a kid's birthday party where you bring a magician? Okay? Magician pulls the rabbit out of the hat the first time. The kids go, woo! You pull the rabbit out the second time, they go, ah. You pull the rabbit the third time, the kids are, be playing a video game, okay? The Germans are suffering from this. They make a poor decision, and the Allies start to figure out their shtick. You know the Germans are going to a counterattack, so you do something called a box barrage. You capture a little segment of trench, then you ring it in artillery fire. When the Germans counterattack into it, they hit that wall. But the Germans learn. So in the middle of the war, and in the winter of 1916, they changed their defensive doctrine. Funny thing, when you invade and take somebody else's land, you can give it up. So they actually willingly give up vast swaths of the Eastern Front to retreat back to better terrain. They don't dig in a lot of trenches. What they do is use concreted in pillboxes on the reverse slope of the hill, which means if the Allies can't see the German defenses, they can't target the German defenses. The French think they've got this down coming out of Verdun, and in April 1917, they'll attack a place called Chemin de Dame Ridge against this new German defensive system. The new French commander makes a promise he never should promise. Hey guys, we've got this down. If we're not through within, 48, 72 hours, I'm going to stop the battle. But don't worry about it, we're going to win. First day the attack occurs, French bust their face up against the defenses. Second day, they bust their face against the defenses. Third day, they bust their face against the defenses. How many days? Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day, they bust their face against the German defenses. Shortly thereafter, half of the divisions in the French army will go into what they call collective indiscipline, or what we might call mutiny. Now, as you're trying to get through this, they are doing more and more technological development. This is a technological war. And we're going to take a look at some of the technologies that the sides are fielding to try to get an advantage. War is always about trying to get an asymmetric advantage. Some of them are quite basic. This is the model 1915 Showgun. It's the world's first mass-produced automatic rifle. The idea behind it is, if I can't give you big heavy machine guns to carry, and I can't guarantee the artillery is going to be there for you, then I'll just give every squad an automatic rifle. This thing has a 20-round magazine. It'll empty that magazine in about 5 seconds. The idea is walking fire. As you attack, the gunner is firing about a 3 to 4 second burst every second or third time their foot hits the ground, keeping the enemy's head down. Okay? Now, here's the problem. It's bad to be first. When you want it bad, you get it bad. The French are making this in a bicycle factory in Paris. You can probably see by the design. Okay? It's being made out of welded and stamped parts, one of the first time in history, so you can make a bunch of them. Who do you think's making this? Women? What? Women making my Showguns? Yeah, okay. Women are making this. Old guys like me are making this, right? Young guys, no, you guys are at the front, okay? Now, if you don't mind me asking, how many 1915 Showguns have you made?
Not that I can't, so many I can't remember.
Oh, okay. There was French wine involved, okay? And actually, okay, show of hands, women, how many of you have built a 1915 Showgun? You actually have something in common with the French women in the factories who also have not made Showguns, okay? You also have the problem with design. Never let staff officers come up with a good idea. This is a two-man weapon. Again, it's full automatic. You'll empty that magazine in 5 seconds, so the assistant gunner has to be ready to change out the magazine, okay? Now let's have a good idea. Let's do something smart. Let's cut big holes in the side of the magazine so the assistant gunner knows when it's time to change. Makes sense, right? Hey, if one word comes out about trench warfare, what comes to your mind? Mud. Any little bit of mud, any little bit of dirt that gets into the magazine, big stick, no go boom. Okay? Good idea. The technology is not quite there yet. But you do start to see this change. This is what a French infantry platoon would look like in 1914. Yes, rocking bright red breeches and a bright blue jacket. Okay? Everyone except the officer is equipped with a rifle and bayonet only. This is what that same French squad looks like by 1917, 1918. It's half the size, so it's easier to command and control. And now they have a vast array of new rifles. They've got that Showgun. They have rifle grenades. They have hand grenades. Some of them even have automatic rifles as part of this too. Warfare is changing. And it's not big groups of men crossing no man's land. It's little groups here and there, taking every advantage they possibly can of the terrain to try to cross that deadly ground. There'll be some other innovations. World War I will be the first time that poison gas will be used in warfare. And the first successful use of poison gas will occur on the 22nd of April 1915 at Ypres in Belgium. Pretty simple idea. If I put poison gas on the enemy's trenches, he's either too dead, too coughing at his lung, or too running away to shoot back at you. The first gas they use is chlorine. And when they use it, it actually works beautifully. Knocks a hole in the Allied line 7 miles wide, nearly 2.5 miles deep. We know what happens next, right? The Germans then goose step into Paris and in the war. Here's the problem. Gas is dependent upon the weather. This attack had been postponed time after time after time, waiting for the right weather conditions. The Germans do not have the reserve of people to keep guys just waiting behind the lines. And so by the time this thing has been canceled now 4 times, Falkenhayn takes the reserves for the attack, moves them to Russia. The other problem is completely human. Please tell me how you explain this to Hans, the German soldier. Hey Hans, we got a cool new weapon, we call it poison gas. All you've got to do is follow right behind the bouncing green cloud. Jump in the trench and everybody's dead, okay? Now, if you're a German soldier, what do you say? 9, what are you, crazy, right? Michael Jackson moonwalking across no man's land. Right? And so by the time the German attack starts to go, it's too late. The Allies have counterattacked. Now the problem with poison gas is the cat is out of the bag. No more surprise. Within 48 hours of the first use of poison gas, you get the first gas masks. It's nothing more than a cotton wadding pad. You have a little bottle of bicarbonate solution you pour on there. Chlorine gas is water soluble, so as long as this is wet, it works. Little pair of steampunk goggles to make keep your eyes good. Okay? Here's the problem, though. I have studied military history, I've been in the Army my entire adult life, and I figured out that people suck. Okay? The minute that chlorine doesn't work, they come up with another gas, phosgene. Phosgene is actually the biggest killing gas of the war because it is odorless and largely colorless. If you get hit with chlorine, you know it. Your body goes into convulsion as it tries to pull that out. Phosgene has no immediate effect. It kills you 2 or 3 days later. From a military standpoint, that's not good. They want immediate effect. So finally in 1917, they come out with the worst gas of them all, in my opinion, mustard gas. Okay? Now mustard is what we call a blister agent. So when it gets on your skin, it raises these nasty chemical burns, weeping chemical burns. It tends to affect the moist areas of the body most virulently. Your eyes, your nose, your mouth, armpits. Gentlemen, if you get mustard there, you don't want to play Army anymore, right? Okay? Of course, the problem is, that's bad, but if you breathe that in, now those chemical burns are on your lungs. And what happens is the lungs try to flush it out, fill the lungs full of fluid, and you drown. But of course, the minute you come out with a new gas, you come out with a new gas mask. So it's this constant keeping up with the Joneses. Now, last but not least, when it comes to the technology, my favorite. I was a tanker in the Army for 20 years. And of course, the tank is supposed to be that solution to the trench problem. A tank then and now is simply nothing more than mobile protected firepower. You take a tank, you put it on those big tractor wheels, tractor treads, so it'll go across the mud. It will crush down the barbed wire, and you have machine guns or cannons, generally both, to destroy the German machine guns and positions. The first time it's used in battle is the 11th of September, 1916. Okay? Or 11th September is when they start moving towards the battle area. When they do that, 49 tanks is almost the entire number of tanks in the world. When they first use it in battle on the 15th of September, you see what happens. Only 32 actually make it to the start point. And in the midst of the attack, 9 of them break down, 5 more ditched, which is World War I for help me, I've fallen and can't get up. Okay? Tank falls in a shell hole, tank falls in a trench, doesn't have the power to get out. 10 are knocked out by enemy fire, mostly shell fire. But some of these have actually gone through, knocked a hole in the lines, and caused panic in the German army. Now you got to think about this with all new technology. Where you get a tank in 1915 to field in 1916 is you look at an American Holt agricultural tractor. But think about what you're doing to that tractor. You're taking a Holt American agricultural tractor, bolting on hillbilly armor and big heavy cannons. No wonder they're breaking down. Now, by the time you get to the end of the war, you've got a lot more tanks. But you still haven't fixed that problem. The technology is there. Some of the ideas that we still use today in armored warfare are there. But the technology hasn't caught up. The Germans are fielding purpose-designed anti-tank weapon. That is a Gewehr T-Gewehr 1918. It's the world's first anti-tank weapon. It's basically nothing more than one of these on steroids, about this big, firing a 13-millimeter cartridge to knock out the tanks. But you notice you still have the same problem. What I would tell you is if you were the commander of the tank corps, you've got one more day of battle, then you have no more tanks. The idea is there, the technology hasn't caught up. And the Germans know they got to do something soon. With the collapse of Russia, they think they have the answer. They can now move millions of men from the Russian front to the Western front and end the war before the number of new young Americans show up to change the dynamic of the battlefield. With these new guys, they also use a new tactic, become known as stormtrooper tactics. You take select guys. You take the best and the brightest and the youngest you can from your existing infantry divisions. You put them together in new organizations. You give them a lot of heavy weapons. And you tell them, we're not going to attack the way we did before. We're going to use a lot of reconnaissance. We're going to find the weak points of the Allied lines, and then we're going to infiltrate in. Hit them where they're not. Don't worry about taking machine guns out from the front. Go behind it and take the machine gun out there. And once you've broken through the line, better yet, go deep. Take out the command post. Take out the artillery. Because if I can deprive the enemy of his command post, I've destroyed the nervous system of the army. And if I take out the artillery, I've destroyed the thing that gives them the power. Good idea. And it generally works pretty well, except you're still doing some heavy fighting. And these stormtroop units take enormously heavy casualties. Now we got a problem if you're the Germans. You have stripped the best and the brightest and the youngest and the most aggressive from your infantry divisions to fill these up. And when these guys are dead, nothing else is left. And these guys are showing up in very large numbers. In the process of this massive bloodletting, we invent modern warfare. I love this analogy. If you were to take a British infantry battalion commander from the Battle of Waterloo, fighting Napoleon, 1815, put him in a time machine and moved him to 1914, just before the war begins. Yeah, the technology has changed, but he understands the battlefield. That infantry and artillery and cavalry still basically operate the way they did 99 years before. But if you were to take an infantry battalion commander from 1914, put him in a time machine and move him 4 years to the future, he's lost. The pieces parts don't work the way they did before. And the army that comes out of 1918 looks a lot like the army I fought with in the Iraq War of 1991, and very much like the U.S. Army that we have today. So how does it end? When the Germans run out of men. Clemenceau is right. Victory in World War I hinges at the last moment. It's not really clear until the late summer of 1915, until August of 1918, that the Germans aren't going to win this war. Clemenceau pegs it. The victor will be the one who can believe for a quarter of an hour longer than his enemy that he is not beaten. Okay, folks, I've covered a lot of material. Talked about some good, gruesome stuff, okay, on a Friday night. Nightmares for everybody tonight. What are your questions?
Where do I sign up?
Where do you, always one in every group, right? Yes, sir. Yeah, the Germans will first use flamethrowers. They will experiment them in 1915 and then really hit them hard for their initial assaults in Verdun in February of 1916. The problem, of course, is you got to get close to the guy to use it. And so while it's a horrible weapon, both sides figure out that if you target the user, if you can shoot them down, then they're really not that big of a challenge. They're usually two-man crews. One guy holds the nozzle while the other guy has the container, so they're very unwieldy on the battlefield itself. Yeah, good question.
What about the hot air balloon?
That's part of the artillery spotting, that you have these observation balloons all the way behind the front, and they serve the same purpose as the aviation flying. In many ways, they're more effective because they're stable. They can watch the same area of the front and get a better appreciation for what's changing and what's not. The downside is they're stable, which means that they become perfect targets for the other guy. There's an American named Luke who will go down in history as one of the greatest balloon busters. He just loves to shoot them down and will ultimately win a Medal of Honor for that. So the bigger balloons, the Zeppelins, will actually be the world's first true strategic bombers. And so if you think of the Hindenburg, it's sort of the same thing. And they'll be used by the Germans to attack Paris and then later London. But the ones you're talking about are the little small ones. Good question.
What were living conditions like in the trenches? In other words, sleeping, eating, bathrooms, that sort of thing.
There's always one. Okay. Now, it's horrible. It's a troglodyte existence. First of all, you're covered with lice. They take you out of after about 2 weeks of the frontline trenches. You'll go back to the reserve trenches, and from there you'll go into the rest trenches. And the rest trenches are oxymoronic. You don't rest. They actually use those guys to bring the ammunition and the food in every night, so you never really get any rest while you're in the battle area. You have no bathing. In fact, when you're in the frontline trenches, you're told to keep on your uniforms and your equipment and your boots at all time to be ready for the attack. The food is whatever can be brought up to you. You start off with cooked rations, but you quickly figure out that if you get uncooked rations and make the guys cook them in the frontline trenches, they got to create fire. Fire creates smoke. Fire creates light. Fire tells the other guy, drop the artillery here. So increasingly, as the war goes on, the soldiers are eating canned rations. When it comes to bathrooms, they have latrines that they dig. They try to put it in an area away from where you're going to be living. And most of the time, the guys are living underground. So they will dig. The Germans are really good at this. And in the Somme, the chalk soil actually allows them to dig their bunkers 18 feet below the ground, which is completely impervious to anything other than a direct hit. But it's miserable. You know, it is absolutely a troglodyte existence. You're living with mud all the time. The trench itself is always being reclaimed by Mother Earth. So battle is actually occupying a very small amount of the soldier's life. Most of their time in the frontline trenches is shovel work to keep the trenches from collapsing on them. And flies, yeah, going with those latrines and dead bodies and everything else. And rats feeding off the corpses. So it's horrible. Yeah, a trench foot, when you can never get your feet dry, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is there anything from 1918 past 1935 that didn't change? Like from 1952, it took my destroyer 3 hours to get ready to go underway, and you had big steering wheels. That today a ship has a steering wheel like this and
True.
a throttle like this, and the jet engine goes to 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, when it works, yes. When you get to World War II, some of the things that had been pioneered in World War I, you come to fruition. One of the things that allows Platoon to keep Verdun supplied are trucks, where before logistics was horse. And it will still be mostly developed by horse, but it's going to show the way forward of motorized, there we go, motorized logistics. The tanks change, of course, in their design, but some of the idea behind them, especially by the time you get to 1918, sort of the same, weapons of breaking through the front line. The only thing that sort of remains the same, the Vickers will stay with the British Army through the 1950s. The American Springfield rifle will be slowly phased out for the M1, but a lot of the concepts have already been pioneered. And even the concept of things like aerial combat, that almost every mission that the U.S. Air Force does today had been pioneered by the end of World War I. The only exception is like strategic lift, strategic reconnaissance, but close air support and strategic bombing and all that, they had already played with. And some of the fighter tactics, like the Immelmann Loop, perfected in 1915, will still be used in World War I and Korea. So, good question. Thank you.
I have a question. How did they get the information from the balloon down to command center? I mean, they're up there, but...
The balloons are tethered to the ground. They're actually tethered. They have big winches. So when the enemy aviation comes, you're trying to quickly winch it down. But one of the things that are tied when they're tethered is there's a telephone link. So there's a telephone. The guys are actually on the phone calling back down. By the time you get to 1917, 1918, they're actually very small radio spark sets that are going up in the airplane too, using radio telegraph, using Morse code to send directions. Okay, so they're pioneering things that that would have been incredible to them even in 1914.
What about pigeons?
Yeah, pigeons are again, that's a technology that's been around for years. Problem with pigeons, they're slow. You ever heard of Cher-ami? It's the pigeon from the Lost Battalion. It gets a medal because the Americans are getting artillery fire from the Americans, and so they use their last pigeon to tell the Americans to stop firing. Problem is that the part of the story they never tell is by the time the pigeon actually arrived, the shelling had been over for 20, 30 minutes. The problem with pigeons, of course, is you've got to get them to the front lines. They come in these little wicker baskets, okay? And when the soldier is going forward in a battle, when he gets under fire, he's going to jump in a hole, and if the pigeon happens to be under him, okay? You ever seen a little pigeon gas mask? Neither have I, okay? And the American Army has some problems. The logistics in the American Army in the Battle of Meuse-Argonne breaks down, so soldiers are going days without eating. So after 4 days without eating, the pigeon looks like chicken. Yeah. It's a good question. Yes, sir.
America comes into the war late.
It does.
And it seems as if Blackjack Pershing leads as a donkey, that they paid no attention to what the French and the English and the Germans have done prior to that time, and he sends men against bullets, death, 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 until he stops being a donkey. Is that true?
Well, except for that stop part, but yeah. Pershing is an interesting guy. Look, if you think about what the American Army had been doing since the Civil War, it was counterinsurgency. It was policing the empire, fighting Indians, fighting banditos in Mexico, fighting bolos in the Philippines. And so we're not prepared for this in any way, shape, or form. The American Army itself and the National Guard, when we go to war, is less than 300,000 men. That's a bad day of wastage on the Western Front. And our officers aren't ready for modern war. Don't have the equipment for it. If you look at the American Army, the vast majority, the Showgun, which has a very bad reputation, French gun, it's the one we adopt. The French 75 gun is the one we adopt. We use French tanks. We use British and French aircraft. So the world's greatest industrial power can't field modern weapons. And it's a steep learning curve. Well, if you think about it, we look like those armies of 1914.
which meant that
Yeah,
out of arrogance, they didn't learn.
there's
that-
part of that. Yeah,
That here's a war that's been going on.
Yeah.
And now you're coming in late, and instead of learning from the tactics that have already, or the war that's already been
well,
there.
and there's truth, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm asking for a little sympathy for the devil, though, right? That by the time that the Americans show up, and really don't show up in numbers until the late spring of 1918, we're still kindergarten, and the other armies have gone to the graduate school of warfare. And so our learning curve is so steep that there would have been almost nothing. Though there is a lot of arrogance in Pershing's headquarters blowing off what the French and the British recommend. He does say rightfully that you can't trust them, because what the British and French want to do is break up the American army, put them in existing French and British formations and have them fight with them, which, no country is going to do that to their force. But yeah, I agree with you. I've written on that, and
Why was he called Blackjack Pershing?
because he commanded African American soldiers in the 1890s and in Cuba.
Right, it was not a compliment because the other term was.
There was,
N-word.
yeah.
Pershing.
Yeah, that doesn't make it an apprentice often, but yeah, absolutely. But in fairness to Pershing, he talks a lot about what he calls open warfare, which is these Brits have got it wrong. The Brits and the French have got it wrong. And if you look at what they're doing, you can say, okay, there may be some justification for that. But his whole idea of open warfare is really to stave off the attempts by the Allies to amalgamate American forces. But if you look what he says independent infantry attacking with rifle and bayonet, which is dumb.
Right, which is dumb.
But if you look what he does, the division structure that we create is very firepower heavy. So we do take some of the organization of the French. So, yeah, good question, though.
Did we lose a lot with the mustard gas?
Actually, very few soldiers actually died to gas. The numbers are pretty small. Again, if you are prepared for it becomes a nuisance. The Americans, percentage-wise, suffer more casualties from gas than the Allies simply because they're so horribly trained. But the numbers are pretty small, even the AEF. Again, the big killer, the big hammer is artillery. But still wouldn't want to go through it,
Somewhere in there is the flu epidemic of 1918.
which is the big killer. In fact, if it wouldn't have been for the flu epidemic, World War I would have had the dubious distinction of being the first war in history where more people had died due to combat than disease. But it sort of skews the scale a bit. Yes, sir.
This is more of a logistical kind of question. You
Sure.
mentioned 660 pounds per yard of trench.
Mhm.
Wouldn't they have actually had to fire a lot more than that, given the number of unexploded shells that occurred at that time?
Most of the time, they do not think about that. That if you look at the first day of the Battle of the Somme, there's an estimation that of the 2 million plus rounds that they fire in the 7 days prior to the battle, as many as 20% of them didn't explode. Okay? Having gone through those battlefields with a metal detector, I will tell you that there's a lot of stuff still there that will blow up and kill you. So, but it doesn't come into their. That is a minor thought that they have. But even with the idea of misfire, they know they can't continue with 660 pounds. Good question, though.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. For some reason or another, the Zimmerman telegram came to mind.
Sure.
Which brings me to this.
Uh-huh.
Do you know if the Germans ever broke the Army's cipher code?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we're using mostly British and French codes, and by that time it gotten pretty good. Now they had gotten very good at tapping into the telephone lines, and there's actually some induction. Since you half bury the line, it still radiates some stuff out through the soil. So the Germans are very good at these listening posts, and the Allies too, at being able to figure out what's being said on the phones. Now, most of that, though, that intelligence is ephemeral. It goes away pretty quick. So, good question. Yes, sir.
What about the snipers of World War I?
Everybody does it. And it becomes one of those realities of trench warfare when you can only say about that much. It becomes one of those skills. The Germans have an early lead, mostly because of their optics industry. The German optics are the best in the world. And they had been training some of the snipers before. It takes the British and the French a while to catch up with it. And the Americans come in a little bit late, but they do the same thing. So they're always nasty. People hate them. I will tell you from the Americans, when I do research, German machine gunners who fight to the last minute and snipers never taken prisoner, which also hasn't which hasn't changed, by the way. So yeah.
We're going to end the questioning here. I think we could spend all night. And
I'm for it. No, okay.
Okay. Thank you for making a very complex subject understandable.
Thank
you. I just appreciate you sharing that vast knowledge with us. And I know you're going to stay around a little bit, but we've got a dilemma because we've got a book signing. And so I know people want to come up and look. And these are not loaded and not operable.
Not loaded and not operable.
That's what I was told. After the book signing, if people are still here, I'm sure you'll talk to them about this.
Absolutely.
But if he writes anything like he talks, I think this book is going to be fascinating. Pershing. So a couple announcements. Monday is Veterans Day. The museum, yes. I would like all veterans and active military to stand and be recognized. Thank you for your service. Since we're closed on Monday, you're all free to come in on Sunday and see the exhibits, so active military and veterans. Then we have a couple programs coming up after Thanksgiving. On Thursday, December 12th, we have Pictures with Santa, and I want to see you all there. And if you want to bring your kids and grandkids, okay. But that's a free day, too. It's 3 to 7, and come out and enjoy Christmas shopping, or just enjoying Santa. And then on December 13th is our next program. And it is, the author is Charlie Potler, who has spoken here before. He's the director of Shawneetown in Kansas City. And his topic is Lindbergh, the Lone Eagle. So come on back. And we will have cookies. We'll have Christmas cookies. So thank you for coming. Please, I'm going to have you go out to sign the books because everybody will want to talk. One more round.